our side believes that we would make museums free for everyone. So proud to propose. Now, some set up them. So first, what are museums? Museums are educational places and buildings that focus on historical significance like World War I, the French Revolution, the rise of capitalism, and etc. They're built to help people learn about history and how we have come to the status quo. And next, what would free look like on our side then? Free looks like that all ages, no matter how old you are and no matter what your financial status is, you can enter the museum. You don't need to pay to enter the museum. It's as simple as that. And how will we control and ensure safety then? We think that safety will still be available on our side as we ensure that security guards are around and CCTVs will be guarding the area. And we think that museums, every kind, will have its own security system, right? Because there is this incentive for them to protect the museum as the museum holds historical importance and remembrance. We will also set a limit of the number of visitors per day to ensure their safeties. And how will we ensure that museums still receive the funding then? This would include government grants, private donations, charities, corporate sponsorships, and their own earned income from sources like gift shops, cafes, and events. So our stance is clear then. We would make museums free for everyone. And lastly, the burden of proof in this debate is for proposition for our side is how making museums free will bring more benefits, and for side opposition, why making museums free is just unnecessary. So before I move on to my arguments, are there any engagement? 3, 2, 1. Assuming there are none, let me continue then. My first argument will be about education. So panels, we tell you that museums are a form of education, right? Which teaches individuals about many different things. Firstly, on how it is a form of education. So education directly refers to the process of acquiring knowledge and etc. And making museum free allows all individuals to have equal access to be able to gain knowledge and education despite challenges they might face. And we tell you that education should be a privilege, not something that can only be given to a certain number of people. So for example, like when students visit museums, they can connect with history, they can connect with art, culture, and etc., and learn things outside of school. And second layer then on how it benefits individuals as a form of education. So panels, when museums are free, people are more likely to visit again, right? Which deepens their understanding and curiosity. And like this gives individuals the chance to explore the topics that interest them beyond what is taught in school. And we tell you that this kind of learning develops critical thinking and creativity and curiosity as well by allowing people to experience history, art, and culture firsthand. And moreover, it benefits not only the students, but also adults who continue to learn throughout their lives. Now, moving on to my second argument then, which is about cultural preservation and appreciation. So if museums are free, we tell you that more people will want to preserve and recognize its beauty and appreciate it. So first layer then on preservation. Like I said before, more people would want to visit museums if they are free. And like this allows people to see that museums are in fact important. And panels, we tell you the more people see and understand the culture, the history, and the beauty of the museums, the stronger the sense of belonging to the museums, right? So if more people would want to visit it and preserve it. And second layer then on why making it free will make more people appreciate it even more. So free access to museums also allows people from all over the world to experience each country's distinct cultures. And we tell you that when more people see how vibrant and rich so many cultures are, they would appreciate and respect it more, right? For example, in countries like the UK, where many museums are free, there's a proven increase in public engagement and overall knowledge. So let's weigh this then. By making museums free, we create equal access to education for everyone, regardless of their financial background. The impact of this is far-reaching. It encourages curiosity, lifelong learning, and a more informed society. But meanwhile, some opposition might argue that about financial costs, but those are short-term, and we tell you that can be covered through government funding or donation, which we tell you that visitors would want to donate because they want to preserve museums. For all those reasons, then we are proud to propose.
Free museums seem ideal until we realize if entry is free, who funds the preservation of our heritage? Without admission fees, museums face budget crises that threaten their very existence. We risk empty halls, decaying artifacts, and cultural loss, far greater than the prices of a ticket. So is free for all truly free or just a costly illusion? Honorable Judge, esteemed proposition, and fellow opposition. We on the opposition strongly oppose the motion. This House would make museums free for everyone. I would like to start with some rebuttals. First side, opposition said free museums make education accessible to everyone. Accessibility isn't about the price. Transport time and awareness still limit many people. Plus, if museums lose revenue, they may reduce exhibits or close entirely, making them less accessible in the long run. They also explain how free museums would encourage people to visit museums. However, more visitors isn't always better. Overcrowding stresses staff and risks damage to fragile exhibits. Museums work best when visitors can explore a more comfortable place, not when they're packed shoulder to shoulder. Now I'd like to move on to our framing. We frame this debate around the sustainability and preservation of
POI.
I will not be taking any POIs, and preservation of cultural heritage. While the proposition focuses on access and inclusion, we argue that the core issue is funding the lifeblood that keeps museums alive, curated, and educational. Making it universally free is not just a question of cost to visitors, it threatens the financial foundation that ensures museums can maintain exhibits, protect priceless artifacts, and provide quality educational programs. Without stable revenue streams, museums risk decay, reduce quality, and eventual closure, which ultimately deprives society of the cultural enrichment and historical knowledge they aim to preserve. We would like to mention that we are not charging ticket prices for all types of people, but rather than adults who have some economic independence. Therefore, meaning that we do not charge students under the age of 13, ensuring young people have access to culture. Additionally, veterans who also access freely by showing their past as they have contributed to society and should be allowed to acknowledge their part of the history. Now I'd like to move on to my substantives. My first substantive point is about financial stability. Many museums depend significantly on ticket sales as a key revenue source, typically making up to 25 to 30% of their earned income. The funding is essential for maintaining high quality exhibits, paying expert staff, and supporting vital research and conservation efforts. Imagine a mid-sized museum that brings thousands of visitors annually, each paying admission fees that collectively sustain its operations. If museums were to suddenly make this free, the study income would disappear overnight. Without these funds, museums would be forced to cut back sharply, laying off skilled staff, reducing exhibit quality, and delaying or canceling important preservation projects. Over the time, the museum's ability to educate the public would diminish, potentially leading to partial or even full closure. This means fewer cultural and educational opportunities for everyone, including the very committees the motion claims to help. My second substantive point is that people who could take advantage of free museums, people could often associate value with cost. If museums are free, some visitors may take them less seriously or treat exhibits carelessly. Charging a fee encourages respect and engagement with exhibits. Research on visitor behavior reveals that paying admission fees often correlates with deeper engagement and longer visits. Museums that charge entry tend to see visitors spending more time exploring exhibits. Visitors paid museum who are paying for museums are more likely to approach their visit with intention and respect, valuing the experience as something worth paying for. Conversely, free museums often attract a higher volume of casual, shorter visits, with some visitors potentially perceiving the experience as less valuable or important. This can lead to careful behavior around exhibits and a reduced level of attentiveness. Charging admissions maintains not only the financial health or museums, but also the integrity of the visitor experience. Without a fee, the perceived value diminishes, risking careless behavior and superficial engagement. In conclusion, admission fees act as a vital commitment from visitors, ensuring museums remain respected, well-maintained spaces where cultures and histories are preserved and appreciated deeply. This is why we've never been prouder to oppose. Thank you.
To be open for free, it's not just educational benefits topical. Judge, we tell you that all the issues op may throw at us are solvable, whereas our benefits cannot be given any other way else. So proud to propose. They talked about how without the fees, there would be no one paying and there would be no funding, right? The very point side opposition said this, it's clear that they never listened to our speech because from the very get-go, we have already provided the exact metric on how exactly we're going to provide funding for these museums. Funding exists under both sides of this debate, but op doesn't seem to. I will be re-explaining. Number one, there will be governmental funding because governments work for the country. They would want to put in financial investments to fund for the museum because the museums literally hold the country. Can hold benefits such as cultural appreciation, significance, and the economy. But these I will elaborate further in the extension so that governments would actually have an incentive to fund. And even if these funds are not enough, we're always still open for donations and charity. And again, moving on to second clash, we talked about how overcrowding makes it harder for staff and museum management. Panels, we have already proposed a metric from the very get-go. As my PM has mentioned, we will have a system where we would have a limit of people per hour or per time slot, and they could book or pre-order slots for a certain time online. So this would avoid overcrowding and all of the disadvantages that may come with it. But then they talked about how charging fees encourages respect and deeper engagement. However, we would like to argue with you. If you give a fee, there would still be a crowd of people that don't have enough money to pay for the fee that want to learn more. We tell you without the fee, you're giving the people with the people that originally did not have enough resources to pay, you're giving them a chance to go into the museum and look at the cultural significance. Because most of the times, the people that actually do want to engage, the people that actually want to see these museums, they don't have the money to and they don't have the resources to. We tell you this opens up opportunities for everyone and allows inclusivity and fairness. But then moving on to my extension, how it helps with economy and tourism. Judge, we tell you that making museums free would be a responsibility for governments, as it's for the education for the community, because the benefits of museums are actually collective. You get education, cultural preservation, and economic boost. So then this serves as enough reasons to use taxpayers' money to fund these museums, and governments themselves have a social responsibility fund to ensure free entry, as it allows for fairness and inclusivity in the community. But then again, even if those fees are not enough, which is not likely, as mentioned by my PM, we will still be open for funding and charity initiatives, so people could donate. And we would like to remind you that in our status quo, donations, charities, funding, they're all very easy and they're all easy to get, especially through social media and through awareness campaigns. Now, even if that's not enough, we'll push for another reason to give governments incentive, economy and tourism. Judge, we tell you that when you open the museums up for free, it attracts both local and foreign tourists to come at a higher rate because it's free. Now, what would that do for the economy? As they visit the museum, they would consume in the businesses around the museum, and there would be spending in nearby restaurants, cafes, and shops. And that would extremely boost the economy and cash flow in the area. So, what does this mean then, right? When there's cultural tourism, there's a big flow of tourists and visitors. More businesses would have the incentive to open up around there, and it would provide jobs and support the local economies. So it would also become a benefit for the people, as a better economy means that people have more jobs, higher incomes, better living standards, while the government gains more money to improve public services and again bring the funding back to the museum. And a reason for the government to make museums free. This gives them enough incentive, and this is enough reasoning. But now, and for all those reasons, I strongly propose. Thank you.
Honorable Judge, esteemed proposition, and fellow teammates, have you ever walked into a museum and felt like you were in a completely different world? You get to see amazing paintings, historic artifacts, or even dinosaur skeletons up close. Now imagine that same museum packed so full of people that you can't even see the exhibits properly. It sounds frustrating, right? Well, that's what could happen if we make museums free for everyone. I'm the second speaker of side opposition, and I will add on to our case. But before I begin my main arguments, I would first like to begin with my rebuttals. Firstly, proposition said that governments could fund the museums. However, government funding is limited and often focused on large museums. Smaller or niche museums rely heavily on ticket revenue to survive. Removing fees could force these museums to close, reducing diversity and cultural offerings. They also said businesses could thrive around free museums. While that sounds nice in theory, it ignores how museums actually fund these businesses. Many cafes, gift shops inside or near museums rely on museum visitors who pay the entry fees. If museums are free, the revenue that supports these facilities could drop, meaning fewer visitors spend money in local shops. More businesses won't automatically open if the museum itself is struggling to survive or maintain equality. So free entry could hurt the very economy they're claiming it would boost. I will add on to this in my speech. Now I will start with my speech. First, let's think about the overcrowding. Museums are not just big empty rooms. They're carefully organized spaces where every exhibit is placed to be seen and appreciated properly. Many exhibits are delicate or historic, like ancient artifacts, famous paintings, or fossils. If museums were free, more people would rush in at the same time. Imagine a tiny room with hundreds of people lining to see a single painting.
Yoy.
You wouldn't be able, no thank you, you wouldn't be able to see it properly, and the painting itself could get damaged. Increased foot traffic also puts pressure on the staff. Museum staff don't just stand around, they protect exhibits, answer questions, and guide visitors. If too many people come in at once, staff may be overwhelmed and unable to do their jobs properly. This could reduce in the quality of the experience for everyone, and people might feel stressed, rushed, or unable to enjoy exhibits fully. Free entry might sound fair in theory, but in reality, it could make museums less enjoyable and educational, which defeats their very purpose. Second, museums rely on more than just ticket sales to survive. Cafes, gift shops, and special programs inside the museum are funded partly by the money visitors spend when they pay for tickets. These extras help museum maintain exhibits, pay staff salaries, and even organize special events like workshops or science demonstrations. If entry is free, fewer people might spend money on these additional services, which could reduce the museum's overall revenue, meaning they might have to cut staff, close cafes or gift shops, or limit the number of exhibits they can maintain. Smaller museums or special interest museums could suffer the most because they often rely heavily on these funds to stay open. So free entry doesn't just affect the visitor, it affects the museum's ability to provide a quality experience for everybody. So while the idea of free museums sounds great at first, it would actually make visiting less enjoyable, more crowded and underfunded, and museums are where because museums are supposed to be places where we can go learn, explore, and appreciate the culture. We should make these places we should make sure these places remain well maintained and enjoyable for everyone, not overrun and underfunded. For all these reasons, we have never been prouder to oppose. Thank you.
Panels, when you commercialize history and make it something that you need to pay to get access to, you don't appreciate history like side opposition says, because you make it sound like only a certain group of people who have enough and sufficient money can get access to museums and history. We think this is morally unjustified and is not practically sustainable. How to propose? Clashes then. Firstly, how without fees, who's going to pay, right? Judge, I think from the very get-go, set up speech, they never really understood what we said or even understand it, because we have always provided ways, metrics, and explanations of how are the museums going to be funded either way in the debate. It's simple, right? Governments will want to financially invest in the museum, not only because the museum boosts the country's cultural significance, but also because museums boost the country's economy as they bring in foreign networks, trade, and people. But even if the government's funding is not enough, we tell it that there are going to be private donations, charities, and their own earned income from sources like gift shops, cafes, and events, which are available in a lot of museums. Plus, there will also be like corporate sponsorships and collaborations. So we think that either way, the museum will always receive sufficient funding, because at the end of the day, governments will not want museum to fall or like run out of money, because it gives the country literally more income, which boosts the global influence of the country, GDP, and the country's financial status. Second clash then, about how government's funds only give to the bigger museums and niche museums are completely forgotten. We tell that most of the museums are literally in the bigger and more significant ones, like in the more significant cities, which governments rich enough to fund. It's unlikely for a museum to exist in an area where the government couldn't support it in the first place. So I don't think that this argument would even like happen efficiently in the first place. And adding to that, economy would be improved with free museums, so governments get richer and they would have enough money to refund these museums because of tourism and higher rates of like income. But even if we take them on their best case, where sure governments cannot fund, however, judge, there will all be donations and charities that are still open, and in our status quo, it's easy to raise awareness or raise fund online through the increase of social media. I accept that.
What do you say about these donations and these gift shops being unreliable and unpredictable?
I don't think that is the case, because they are open because they want to raise the money. So we think that there's always going to be an incentive to improve them and to make them what the like visitors want. And they also provide enough financial gains for the museum to survive. And even if it won't, the governments will be funding it in the first place. So I don't think that argument will stand anyway. And before moving on to my weighing, judge, note that side ops only arguments are that without fees, the museum will not receive any funding. And secondly, the people will overcrowd the museum, which we side proposition has constantly rebutted. Moving on to my weighing then. On side proposition, what do we get? First, cultural being a culture being appreciated and not being used for marketing and financial gains, which lies under how morally history should not be commercialized. And secondly, economic benefits, since we get high rates of tourism because of the free free museums. And thirdly, an increase of historical education in people, because we allow people, no matter their financial status, to come and visit the museum, and overall more awareness of history. While in side opposition, you frame history as something that you need to pay to learn, and secondly, you get more money paid towards the museum, which we think that we have rebutted consistently, right? And so we have one under two metrics. Firstly, principle, as we understand how important history is, and it shouldn't be commercialized or something you need to pay to get access to, because we realize that history is what made us what we are today. And secondly, practicality, as to provide a more sustainable metric due to how we don't block access to history. Instead, we provide more historical awareness and cultural significance, appreciation, and preservation. So panels, on the basis of museums, culture, economies, and history, we're so proud to propose. Thank you.
The debate comes down to two sides. First of all, it comes down to engagement and respect versus access, which the proposition has constantly mentioned. And then in today's speech, I'll be talking about some rebuttals and going into extending on my speaker's point and then the main clashes. First of all, the proposition side has strongly mentioned that everybody should have the right to acknowledge and learn from different places and history. Yes, that's true. But do we rather pursue quantity over quality? We strongly disagree this, because what is the point of having audiences, too much audiences, even though you say that you'll be limiting these audiences, which I'll also be rebutting to it later. What are they when all they do is simply just read the caption and forget it? The most important part is the learning. When we charge money for the entrance fee, we're promoting museum as a more serious situation rather than a place where we just wander around. Second of all, they also mentioned that it promotes tourism and cultural engagement. Offering museums without a charge does not promote tourism. How attractions alone doesn't equal tourism benefits, because people don't travel long distances just for free entries.
Why?
They go for cultural guidance. Yes.
Why do you think people go to museums if they're going to forget everything they learned, like you said?
We've never said that people are gonna forget. They're just gonna briefly look over the captions, and they're not gonna like remember everything, because like a lot of people just go into museums and just simply read over it and skim over it, and then they'll just like not accept everything in their mind. They might like only have a few like ideas left over in their mind, and it wouldn't cause a big difference rather than just reading a history book at your house. And second of all, continuing on my rebuttals, simply removing the ticket prices doesn't automatically make museums more appealing, because people don't just go to places where there's a free museum. They go to countries that actually have deep cultures and, for example, great foods and tourism. And third of all, they also mentioned about security guards and constantly mentioned about private donations. As I mentioned in my POI, donations fluctuate, sponsorships may come with conditions, and gift shop revenue depends on visitors' spending. Museum cannot count on these to consistently maintain security and quality. Last of all, they also mentioned that you guys limit the amount of people coming in. But how will they enforce it consistently? Limiting numbers requires staff, scheduling, and monitoring, which is costly and complicated. Free entry combined with these limits may still lead to confusion. And also, by limiting visitors, they're effectively introducing a barrier that contradicts the promise of free access. Some people may be turned away or forced to schedule in advance, which reduces the spontaneity and inclusiveness that free museums are supposed to provide. And extending on my previous points, further stretching out on the point of financial stability, even though the proposition says it's only short term, I'm here to show you, Judge, that it's not. Well, why? As I mentioned before, all the donations are unstable, and additionally, no money means no money for the security guard, as proposition side mentioned, for safety. And worse, no budget for cleaning and repair, which decreases the pieces in museums, and then what is there to show? And at last, weighing and main clashes. On engagement and respect versus access, the proposition argues that free entry allows more people to experience museum. We have shown that engagement matters more than attendance. Charging adults ensures visitors reflect, behave responsibly, and value the exhibits. And we're not saying that we're charging everybody. We've mentioned in our metric that we're only charging adults and not children and veterans that should have the rights to be able to be educated with all these knowledge. And at the end of this debate, what we really want from both sides is being able to educate and allow all individuals going into museum to appreciate and learn from it. Even though on our side, I think that's after 3 minutes. even on our side. So therefore, judges, if there's one thing you can take away from this debate is that while on our side, we nurture the seed inside the children to slowly teach them to appreciate and win in the long term, we also charge a little for the adults for them to have a deeper appreciation. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, throughout this debate, we have heard arguments about fairness and accessibility. While these ideas sound appealing, we must focus on the practical on the practical realities of what making museums free would actually mean. Our opponents argue that free museums allow everyone to learn and enjoy culture, but let's be honest, removing entry fees comes with serious consequences. First, museums rely heavily on ticket sales to stay open. This income helps them maintain exhibits, pay staff, and fund research. Without this funding, museums could face budget shortfalls, and what would be the result? Fewer exhibits, lower quality displays, or even museum closures. Accessibility is meaningless if the museum can no longer operate properly. Second, cost often encourages respect. When people pay for a museum, they take the visit seriously and handle exhibits carefully. Free entry could lead to careless behavior, overcrowding, and even damage to delicate artifacts. Museums are not playgrounds, they are spaces for learning and appreciating culture. Third, free entry could lead to overcrowding. Large crowds make it difficult to see exhibits and overburden staff. Visitors might feel stressed and rushed, and reducing the educational value of their visit. This is the opposite of what museums are meant to provide. Finally, ticket-paying visitors support more than just the entrance. They help fund cafes, gift shops, and special programs. If entry is free, museums may lose this indirect income, leading to closures of shops, or fewer resources to maintain exhibits, and the overall visitor experience would decline. In conclusion, while our opponents have argued that free museums are fairer and more accessible, we have shown that free entry threatens the very survival of museums. It reduces respect and engagement and harms the visitor experience. Our side has provided clear practical reasons why keeping ticket fees is necessary for museums to remain functional, educational, and enjoyable. Free entry sounds good in theory, but in practice it would make museums less effective for everyone. So for all these reasons, the opposition has a stronger case. Thank you.
That opposition lost this debate the moment they tell you that they would sacrifice equal accessibility to everyone to prevent large audiences. So proud to propose. Now, some strategic mistakes they've made that they just couldn't understand what we say when we have thought of a clear mechanism where funding would not be a problem. Still, their arguments were mainly about that, although from the very get-go, we've provided a clear explanation on how we would overcome that. And they also emphasized on the point that of large crowds, but again, we've told you that our mechanism also already handles this, and it would be unlikely to happen because there would be limits, and they think that it would be so hard to achieve this. But we tell you, panels, that there are already so many factors that control this in the status quo. So what we're really doing by limiting the number of visitors is just to ensure even more control and safety. Moving on then. So first, we posit that museums are a form of education, and making it free would allow for more appreciation and preservation. The response to this was that there would be no source of funding, and overcrowding would make it harder for staff to manage. But why do we win this clash then? Even if funding is a challenge, like we've said, there are alternative solutions. And accessibility should never be sacrificed for profit, right? But also from the very get-go, we've explained that in our mechanism that we would set a limit. And our side stands for equal opportunity to learn and preserve culture, while theirs limits it to those who can afford it. That's why we take this clash. And next, they told you that governments only fund the big museums, not the small ones. And we tell you, and this is not enough because accessibility should remain the priority. And again, there are many alternative funding methods, such as partnerships, local donations, and etc. And we also tell you that this is very much possible in the status quo. So again, some of side opposition's mistakes that first, we don't get how making only adults pay is going to make the situation any better, because adults are literally majority of the population, so you're affecting majority of people anyway. And second, lower quality displays. Governments will not allow, at least not to the extent where the quality is being severely complained. There are public incentives and societal pressures to not make the museums shut down, as there will always be historical fanatics who are willing to sacrifice their money to provide income for the museum. For all those reasons, then you must vote for side proposition. Thank you.